Welcome back to another impactful episode of the PSA Podcast. I am Craig King, your host, with our favorite, most trusted, most reliable guest, Patrick Kelly, everyone. Patrick Kelly.
Morning, Craig.
Morning. We have somewhat crossed the finish line. Not really.
Yeah, no. I mean, basically the South Carolina General Assembly this year is the student that continues to ask for extensions beyond the end of the 9 weeks when it comes to the grading period. And the beauty of being the General Assembly is you make the laws, so you can get your extension.
And being a high school teacher, you can relate to that story. Elementary guys, we not really.
Yeah.
It's more so high school.
No, I felt right at home at the General Assembly this week between the wild dash that always happens in the last week of a session to get bills across the finish line. That feels just like the homework coming piling in right before the end of the 9 weeks. But yeah, we're not done. We should be. The legislative session should have ended at 5 p.m. on Thursday, May the 11th, according to the state constitution. But the General Assembly did not pass a sine die resolution this year. And without getting too dorky or in the weeds on what that means, effectively it means that the General Assembly can be called back to Columbia for anything because they didn't pass a resolution to govern what they can and cannot do past the end of the regular legislative session and prior to the start of the next legislative session in January on January 9th, 2024. So even though they are supposed to be done, they're not, and Governor McMaster will be calling them back to town this coming Tuesday, May 16th.
Yeah. When I was watching yesterday, I saw where there was a moment in the House where they said, well, the Senate just adjourned, and I think it was like 4:20, I think, and it wasn't even 5 o'clock yet. So that was a good signal that they would be coming back. So
yeah.
So talk to us about what happened this week. But before you do, shout out to Sumter School District Teacher Forum, who came to the State House on Tuesday and enjoyed themselves, went to the State Board of Education and really advocated for themselves and their profession. So shout out to Sumter School District Teacher Forum.
Yeah, and I just got to add, big shout out to Craig King for continuing to put together Hill Days for teacher forums from across the state of South Carolina. I spend every day at the State House, and I see a wide range of advocacy activities where groups bring in individuals to advocate. There is nothing more effective than what Craig puts together for teacher forums because they are locally based, and Craig sets up meetings with the local delegation. This week, big shout out to the Sumter County teachers because on the ultimate, what should have been the final week of the legislative session, not only were they are advocating, they got a one-on-one meeting with the Speaker of the House, Merle Smith from Sumter County, and if there was any man busy in Columbia this week, it's the Speaker of the House on the final week. So big shout out to the Sumter teachers for advocating with the most powerful member of the General Assembly. Also shout out to Speaker Smith for taking time to meet with teachers. He went literally from a meeting with the Sumter County teachers to a meeting with the governor and the president of the Senate and the Senate Majority Leader to to plan out the schedule for the week in the General Assembly. I think that's pretty notable that he met with the teachers first and the governor second. And I'm just going to assume that means that the priority list was teachers first, governor second.
There you go. Yeah. Well, thanks, Patrick, for saying that. You and Tony definitely help us with that, making sure Hill Days are successful. So thank you for saying that. So what happened this week?
Well, it was a wild week at the General Assembly as they were trying to wrap things up. And so I'll just focus on the education space, obviously. A couple notable things. The House passed their second go-round on the budget. Nothing in terms of funding levels changed in the budget. So even though there is a conference committee to work out the final budget to send to the governor, spending levels for education are pretty much set because the House and Senate versions of the budget are the same. There's going to be a $260 million increase in state aid to classrooms, which means every district in South Carolina will get more money from the state next year than they got from the state this year. Also important, since the House passed their second version of the budget this week, that means the conference committee between the House and the Senate can get to work. And barring something unforeseen, the General Assembly should get the budget to the governor's desk well in advance of the end of the fiscal year on June 30th. In fact, they should get it to him before the end of the month of May. And that's important because once the governor signs that budget into law, it allows districts to start planning for appropriations for the new fiscal year come July 1 so they can get their budgets and salary schedules set. One thing that we cannot overemphasize to teachers about this year's budget is that it increases the statewide minimum salary schedule by $2,500 per cell, but that does not mean a $2,500 raise for every teacher unless you work in one of the 8 districts paying at the statewide minimum. So the amount of a raise, if you work in a district that currently pays above the statewide minimum, is going to be determined by your local board. But as Speaker Smith shared with the Sumter County teachers this week, the intent of the General Assembly is that districts will use their increased funding from the state to increase teacher salaries. And we're seeing districts start to take the lead on that. Big shout out this week to York 1 School District, who just approved a $3,000 pay raise for every teacher at every cell on their salary schedule, even though York 1 already pays well above the statewide minimum. That's the intent of the General Assembly, and I hope that other districts will follow York 1's lead.
Shout out to York 1 for taking the lead on that and showing initiative, and hopefully other districts will follow. I do want to ask a question about paid parental leave.
Yeah.
Because we had a phone call here in the office yesterday from the father of a teacher who has a daughter who is pregnant right now, and his question was, when does, if Governor McMaster signs that bill today, when does it go into effect? Was the question.
Yeah, great question. And this was the biggest win for teachers at the State House this week. On Wednesday, the House unanimously concurred with the Senate amendments to that bill, which moves the bill to the governor's desk for signature as soon as it's ratified by the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. It's a formality. It's going to happen. The governor's going to sign it. This is a huge win. PSTA was the first education association in the state to start advocating on this policy 3 years ago. PSTA has worked hard on this policy this year in conjunction with some great partners, Children's Trust of South Carolina, the Women's Rights and Empowerment Network here in South Carolina. We've been fortunate to have some associations that have come alongside us to get this to the finish line, and this bill got a unanimous vote at every stage of the legislative process. Craig, that's incredible that in this political climate, it got a unanimous vote at every stage, so it's going to get signed into law. To the question, the bill goes into effect 45 days after signature of the governor. So hopefully, maybe as we're speaking, Governor McMaster is signing that. It's just a matter of getting it to his desk, and he's going to sign it as soon as the General Assembly literally walks it downstairs to his desk. And PSTA will let members know when that is, and we'll also let you know what the effective date is based on when his signature is. So just be on the lookout in an email in there. Since that's a father that called, the bill is paid parental leave, not just maternal leave. So what the bill is going to do is if you are a new mother giving birth, you're going to get 6 weeks of paid parental leave. If you are a parent adopting a child and you're the primary caregiver, you're going to get 6 weeks paid parental leave. If you're the co-parent in a birth situation, so this father who's calling, you get 2 weeks. If you are the secondary caregiver in an adoption, you get 2 weeks. And if you're a foster parent, you get 2 weeks. And those are paid benefits that can be accessed before you tap any of your existing sick and personal leave. And there's been questions we've received about that too. You don't have to take sick leave first, and then when you're out of sick leave, you get this paid parental leave. This is a benefit that is extended upon birth, adoption, or fostering of a child prior to using any existing leave balance. This is exciting. South Carolina is going to be one of only a handful of states in the nation to offer this benefit. And PSTA is excited to see this policy that we think will enhance teacher recruitment and retention. And it's just pro-family.
Yeah.
I mean, teachers, at the end of the day, anytime you can allow a teacher or an educator to spend more time with children, it's a plus. Usually we're thinking of it in terms of in the classroom, but sometimes it's at home with your own kid. And so we're excited to see that new parents that are educators will be able to put the same time and energy into the new addition to their family that they're putting into their students every day in the classroom.
I think one of my favorite moments throughout this entire journey with paid parental leave has been the support of veteran teachers who have had families who had to exhaust personal time in order to have families to stop teaching for a few. It was never, I wish they would have done this for me. So it's been great to see those veteran teachers who have families grown children now, grandchildren, saying that they're happy for these younger teachers now, or teachers that just want to expand their family through adoption or by natural birth. So great day. Great day.
Yeah. I've loved seeing the emails from our members to legislators saying, I'm done having kids, or I'm not going to have a kid.
Yeah.
But pass this anyway. And ultimately it's because educators care about families and children. But there's also a benefit for every educator, because if this enhances retention, which I think it will, everybody knows that every educator is impacted when there's an unfilled vacancy in a building. And so if this can reduce the number of unfilled vacancies in South Carolina, then everybody's going to benefit from it, whether you've got the paid parental leave or not.
For sure. So before we go today, this question just popped in my head. This summer, what can teachers do? First of all, teachers, rest.
Absolutely.
Don't worry about Patrick's emails.
They're not coming anyway. You're good.
Yeah. But what can teachers do in the off season, as we prepare for next year? Obviously, take a break. What's something that you will share with teachers? And it doesn't have to be advocacy based. I mean, it could just be in general.
Well, let me answer that in two parts, and I know we're going to go a little longer than usual on this podcast, but
that's fine.
It's the end of the session. That's a two-part question. The first part answer to the question is, we're not in the off season yet. To go back to where we started, there's still some legislative work to be done. The budget's not finalized yet. And one thing that's really important in the budget is the House added a proviso that will suspend the Read to Succeed certification requirements for middle and high teachers, unless you teach special ed or English, for the coming year. So if you're a middle school PE teacher, if this proviso gets added into the final version of the budget and your certification is up in 2024, you don't have to fulfill the Read to Succeed course requirement. It would be suspended for a year. Now, listeners may be thinking, well, wait a second, I thought there was a bill to get rid of those altogether. There is. It's S418, but that bill, as we talked about on a prior podcast, was substantially amended by the House, and what the Senate decided to do this week was to carry over the bill. And that doesn't mean they killed it. It just means that when they come back in January, they want to be able to debate and review the amendments added by the House. And they didn't have time this week because it became a substantial comprehensive overhaul of Read to Succeed. The Senate had a lot of things they were dealing with this week, one of which I'll get to in a second in education, but also bond reform and fentanyl and illegal handguns and all kinds of stuff, splitting DHEC in half. Like, they were busy this week. So they carried over S418. It will not become law this year, but it should be on track to become law next year. So be on the lookout for emails from PSTA if there's an opportunity to advocate on the budget, because in particular, that proviso on Read to Succeed is in the House budget, but not in the Senate budget. So we got to make sure it gets into the final budget to suspend Read to Succeed certification requirements for as many people as possible for 23-24, and then we'll continue to advocate in January 2024 to just get rid of it altogether when it comes to recertification. The other area where we're not quite done yet is the Transparency and Integrity Act, which is the first bill I think we talked about on the podcast this year because it was the first thing the House did in education, and we're going to talk about it at the end. The Senate on Wednesday debated that bill for 6+ hours until 11:15 p.m. on Wednesday night. I was there for all of it. I ate some freeze-dried peaches from CVS about 8 o'clock because I knew I wasn't going to make it. But it was an extended debate. The Senate passed the bill, and it's going back to the House, but the Senate amended the bill. Some of those amendments, incredibly positive. The Senate Education stripped out the worst provisions of the House version of the bill about parents from Kansas suing Charleston County Schools, or teachers having to post something to an undisclosed area 3 days before they can use it in class. That's gone. But the Senate also added some floor amendments, many of which are good, but a few of which give me a little bit of heartburn because of imprecision of language about things like, what is a reading and reference material? It's not defined in one of the amendments. One of the amendments would allow a complaint of a violation of the Transparency Act to be filed up to 1 year after the event, which that's just a little weird to me because that means the student could be in the next grade level. It could mean the teacher could be gone. Like they might have gone somewhere else. So it just seems a little weird to me that we're talking 1 year after the fact that you can file a complaint. The statute of limitations feels a little excessive there. The ultimate story there is the House and the Senate version of the bills now differ. The Senate has sent it back to the House, and the House has not decided yet what to do with the bill, but they will. They could concur with the Senate, which will send it immediately to the governor for signature. They could amend it themselves again and send it back to the Senate. I don't think that's likely because they are technically done with the session, even though they're not, but it's possible. What I think is the most likely outcome is the House is going to say, well, we insist on our version, so let's have a conference committee. And that conference committee of 3 representatives and 3 senators could then pick and choose between the House and Senate versions of the bill for a final version to be approved by both chambers to send to the governor. So even though we are technically, quote unquote, at the end of the session, the Transparency Act's not done. Yeah. And I expect that it will be done before the General Assembly for real goes home, probably around June 1st, because they're going to want to wrap this thing up. So members should be looking for specific targeted emails that say, the conference committee is coming. Here's your opportunity to engage with the 6 legislators who are going to determine the final version of this act. So don't unplug yet, because that bill will impact every classroom in South Carolina. The second, I know that was a lengthy answer, but to your ultimate question about what should teachers do once the session is over. Above all, it's what you said, rest and recharge. Like, you got to have energy. And educators have been pouring out energy into students and families for the last 9 months. Mm-hmm. You got to take a chance to recharge the battery, because you can't be an effective educator if you're drained. You also can't be an effective advocate. So recharge. But if you have some time and space for advocacy over the summer, all I would encourage people to do is build relationships with their policymakers, build relationships with your legislators, build relationships with your school board members. Don't go to them with a specific ask. The best time sometimes to talk to a state legislator is June to December, because you can get to know them. They can get to know you. You can build your credibility as a reliable voice in education policy. There are multiple members of the General Assembly that have their quote-unquote go-to teacher, that when an education bill is coming, they will touch base with those people in their home district for feedback. Become that person. Yeah. Build that relationship. Reach out, not with a request or an ask or a complaint. Just reach out and say, thank you for serving. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't agree with their policy position, these people have been in Columbia pretty much nonstop since January. They only got a salary of $10,000. They got full-time jobs at home. Many of them, like Neil Collins, who's the author of the Paid Parental Leave Bill, he's got an infant kid at home. He lives in Pickens County. So Representative Collins is an attorney. He will drive down on Tuesday morning, do legislative work all day, and then he is right back on the road on Tuesday evening because he wants to get home for his baby. And then he'll do it again on Wednesday, and he'll do it again on Thursday. Even if you disagree with the policy positions of someone like that, you can still thank them for engaging in public service. Build that relationship. Then, come January, when we got to ask for things like get rid of Read to Succeed certification,
that's right,
or advance the Educator Assistance Act that's going to be sitting in the Senate Education Committee, you got more ground to make that ask because you've built a relationship. Relationships were the key to getting paid parental leave passed this year. If we continue to build those, we'll continue to have better chances to move other policies into the next session.
Well said, Mr. Kelly. Again, appreciate all your work this legislative session. Thank you to the teachers, most importantly, for your engagement with the Legislative Alert Networks, our 1 Minute Advocacy, our podcast. Shout out to our podcast. We are now over 1,000 downloads, which is awesome. And, we just appreciate all the work that you've done. And so we'll, as things happen during the General Assembly, during the month of May, we'll be back on the podcast to sharing updates, and Patrick will be engaging with you that way. Anything before we sign off today, Patrick?
No, just thanks for putting together this great tool. I'm looking forward to building it out, and I'm excited to know that 999 people other than my mom have downloaded this podcast.
Some of those 999 might be the same person.
That's all right.
But we're not going to say that out loud.
It's not my mom. She doesn't know how to download it twice.
No problem, guys. Well, thank you. This has been another impactful episode of the PSTA Podcast. I'm Craig King, your host. Take care.